Oh, he's coming.
It's all coming up Millhouse.
Alright, Chase, I'm moving up to you.
No, I gotta find.
Skugyugly.
Why don't you bring this?
Skugyugly.
Pretty bad. Mom, you're always trying to give me
Skugyugly.
with you. I just think.
Skugyugly.
So it's been a little over a year of Unity development. I've encountered these kinds of videos before. For me, personally, I found them inspirational, so now I get to offer one up. Offer perhaps some inspiration in exchange for your attention. So join me on a play-by-play of my development journey so far, and don't be one of those attention spanlets who clicks off a video in under 30 seconds. Yeah. You know who I'm talking about. You're not one of them. You've already been listening to me for over 30 seconds, so let's get into it. Let's look at my first game. My first game was just a cube in an endless default void without any player controllers. I looked at it a bit, even moved the cube around. I set this project down, moved on to the next one. Leave a comment and let me know what I could do to take this somewhere. Bean Game. Bean Game was the second game I started, and the first one that I finished. It really helped me out as a game developer because, well, I finished making the game, so it technically made me a game developer. Also known as Bean Game, the most challenging walking simulator. It's rated adult because it has swear words in it. At the risk of spoiling Bean Game outright, which you can play for free in the link below, the game sees you ascend a rather challenging, levitating drawbridge so as to enter a museum. The Bean Museum showcases 55 curated Mr. Bean edits based on an image from a particular amusing-looking GTA San Andreas mod. As the first Bean audio log explains, a friend of mine by the name of Zenro has spent quite a while generating increasingly unhinged edits of this rendition of Mr. Bean. From this creative splurge arose the museum. Bean Game was a product of a month-long game jam among friends, a personalized love letter to the manufactured memes of an artist and musician whose work I quite admire by the name of Zenro. While Bean Game didn't introduce me to the idea of a cacophony of overlapping audio, that came from my 30-episode animated series I made back in 2018. It certainly played a pivotal role in cultivating my interest in using it as a motif in my game design. What's a motif, you might ask? Just an element that repeats. In this particular case, it's the idea of audio files that overlap completely. I found that monologues in particular, offered at a certain cadence, allows for an entirely accidental ebbing and flowing of different concepts to bubble up to the surface, in a sense providing a ripe ground for spontaneous meme generation, a more than fitting motif I felt for a game which actively discusses the evolutionary process of memes. One major wall I ran into with Bean Game was the character controller. At present, I defer my character controller knowledge entirely to those more capable and willing to experiment with such interfacing technologies. Perhaps someday, study permitting, I shall have the knowledge to truly experiment with such aspects of game design, but at present I find the idea of piecing together the actual movement through a digital world a bit beyond me. One of the big positive takeaways I got from Bean Game was that I can be quite funny when I want to be. I've seen too many people busting a gut playing through Bean Game to be dissuaded of this particular notion. The other, and perhaps more important, is that I can indeed finish a game. Without the knowledge that I could actually finish a game, I don't think for a second I would have pursued as many gaming projects as I have over the last year. It's that essential piece of knowledge upon which all these other following projects arguably rest, the idea that a game can be created. To this particular end, I believe game jams have been essential for my last year of development. All the major hurdles I've managed to overcome regarding the finishing of projects, of particular note of the fact that with game jams, there's a real pressure to finish a game in a certain amount of time, a pressure that I find personally my creative style works well under. Which gets into my next game. Project Wreck. finishing aspect is especially true when it comes to grappling with unfinished projects. After Bean Game, I attended a friend's wedding, and on the plane ride back, I cracked out a rather compelling first draft of a script of Project Rack, the game teased near the 4/5 point within Bean Game, as my next big project. Big project turned out to definitely be the case, as both the narrative and technological scope of this particular game quickly grew out of hand. I don't want to delve too deeply into spoilers here, as this is certainly a game I plan to pick back up in some way or another. But the general idea was that you're playing a guy in the far future who gets turned into a raccoon, so now your brain implants are too small for your tiny head. As a result, at least ostensibly, your memory cartridges are scattered all over the map, and you have to pick up the pieces of these memories by inserting the discs into your oversized implants. Each disc would play an audio log offering key insights into both the character and the world you inhabit, which was set to be this sort of vaporwave interpretation of a kind of Dyson cloud encompassing a galaxy, like some kind of 90s megalithic labyrinthian slime mold fever dream. It was, and perhaps one day will be, great. But goodness gracious, are character animations difficult to incorporate into Unity? That was my one negative takeaway from this game. One of the positives was that I figured out how to recontextualize audio logs as a collectible, which just recently made an appearance in Avoid Disc 2 as a key feature. Another would have to be that, as a first pass on an infinite vaporwave cityscape, I think I did an alright job, which helped to further cement what I believe to be one of the core strengths of mine as a game designer, that being a passion for level design that evokes a certain emotion or mood. This, I believe, stretches at least all the way back to my old Warhammer 40k playing days, where I was the one among my friends who made the custom bombed-out buildings, bunkers, and holdouts. I've always had an interest in setting as a concept, in particular how it contextualizes narrative. Now, with game development, I can really go deep into that, setting the stage for countless potential narratives. Speaking of, Avoid Disc 1. Originally titled Churchgoer, Avoid Disc 1 is the only game I sell for money at present, and that's because it's a series I plan to revisit at a longer sort of pace. This whole video is technically sponsored by Disc 2, the trailer of which will play shortly after this video. Avoid Disc 1 takes the cake for the game which started as one thing and deviated the most in the process of making it. By far one of the most experimental and shortest games on the list. Originally, the plan was to explore my personal religious trauma from being raised as a Protestant in the form of a church-shaped mimic, luring the player in to devour. But instead it became a brief meditation on the existentialism left behind in the absence of more traditional religious structures. The ending, however, went full gimmick mode. When you toss yourself into this void-shaped rabbit and plummet into the darkness, the game closes itself. The critical takeaway I ended up getting for this was it's really easy for these kind of game-crashing style gimmicks to not land and instead come across as a kind of a glitch instead of intentional design. Of the two positive takeaways, one of them for Disc 1 was I could indeed incorporate an ending, even if it was one a bit too confusing and esoteric for most players to fully enjoy. And the second big trick I learned is that I could include myself in my games, particularly by way of the classic octopus persona. I think this step was pivotal to the games that would follow, as I further incorporated myself of and throughout the games that would, well, as mentioned, follow. But that would be a while. It would be half a year before I made another game. Fittingly enough, I think it's difficult to avoid these sorts of lulls in creative work. Get it? Hard to avoid? Anyway. I think it kind of works in a way to permit your brain the time it needs to really process what you want to do with your craft. Plus, I was too busy in another line of work I've since moved on from. And frankly, Avoid, I believe, burned me out in a way that left me listless. As I mentioned before, the gimmick failed to land, and all the elaborate ambitions of both Avoid Disc 1 and Project Rack fell short. I knew I could finish a game, though, but I didn't know how fast, at least until Crab Island Ingress. Around wintertime 2021, a fast friend invited me to an international gaming community and probable Space Station 13 Illuminati group. There, I met a large group of fairly creative and comedic people, and it was here the plan was hatched after a few months to host a Krob-themed game jam. Instead of having a month to develop a game, though, we would simply be given the weekend. Thanks to my development of Avoid, I had access to a player controller I purchased, so from there I could focus all of my efforts on developing the setting and audio logs to follow. I immediately jumped on a kind of digital manifestation of the chat room as an island, getting a couple of the active members as well as my carryover friends to voice hastily constructed replicas of them on approach. I also got the idea that, with regard to Bean Game, players might want to avoid the audio commentary to instead search themselves out. I stapled a 30-minute long improvisational essay on internet communities to my octopus persona, and had him follow the player to pace below walking speed. That way you can, if you desire, disengage from the primary audio log to explore. The same AI I used to make me follow the player was also utilized to create an army of Krobs, the total number of which being at the time equal to the number of users then residing on the Discord server. One of the critical takeaways I got from Crab Island Ingress was that I am absolutely terrible at making menus. It's all kinds of misaligned when you boot up the game, and honestly that's probably one of the reasons why this will always be a secret project. Inaccessible to much of the world. One of the positives I pulled from Crab Island was that I could in fact produce a game that played inside a browser. This had the effect of making my games far more approachable in the future, since you wouldn't have to unzip and launch them manually. With Unity in particular, it's been made easy to do from a
trivia
perspective, since all you need to do is have the engine editor do this for you after you adjust a setting. The other was that I could make a game fast. It never really clicked until Crab Island Ingress that I could, using the skills accumulated in my prior games, produce a fully voiced and populated game full of custom art assets and characters in the span of a weekend. Particularly in the latter sense, Crab Island changed everything, because now suddenly I could try for something big, specifically by trying for small. Coming off the end of the in-joke of Crab Island Ingress, I was looking for a challenge, so I took on a big one, angling to make 5 games in 5 weeks, all throughout the month of March. The idea I had, and the one that I think ultimately led to my stumbling, was to not only make a game, but also add a trailer to publish with that game, and a behind-the-scenes video related to that game, and a sort of scarcely related meme video that might catch some amount of attention on YouTube. This is too much to chew on. 3 good videos and a game in a week is maybe someday. Maybe someday I can pull that off, but at the moment, let's go with like 1 video a week every Friday. So I subscribe for that. But back to game dev stuff. To put it simply, if you shoot for the stars, you hit the moon. And in this case, the moon started out by taking the shape of the Backrooms observations. The Backrooms observations were exactly what they say on the tin. Observations about the back rooms. For the Backrooms observations, I managed to take the rudimentary AI from Crab Island and incorporate an additional YouTube tutorial for scene transitions upon contact. In effect, this would result in a instant game over screen should the monster catch you. Of course, I couldn't go without incorporating a brief essay. For my Backrooms game, I tried to get into the mindset of what a creature in the Backrooms might think of the realm it resides inside of. The result I feel was fairly decent, and set the stage for the games to follow, including the formula of making a game trailer followed by the making of video and the tangentially related meme video, which I contend was a solid strategy, if a bit much, for starting out. I think the big critical takeaway from this game, the actual development of this game, was just because you make something along the lines of a viral hit doesn't mean it'll be an instant success. Though for what it's worth, the video on how to make a Backrooms game in a week was, at the time, my second highest viewed video for a while on this channel, so maybe take this takeaway with a grain of salt. The first of the two positives I picked up from this was that I could comfortably make an enemy that could actually do harm to the player, even if that harm was teleporting them to a screen full of text informing them of their passing. The second big positive was that I can write fairly poetically about a topic that a lot of people have been exploring over the last year. I think there's a difficult to place value on thinking poetically about such impactful things. Anyway, then I made Skagugly. What is there to say about Skagugly that Skagugly has not already said about Skagugly? If the Backrooms observations is pandering, then Skagugly is the polar opposite. Sure, with a subtitle like How the Internet Might Kill Us All, it's definitely got a touch of clickbait incorporated in the title, but this particular concept is one that's been circulating in my brain for quite a while now. The nagging sensation that our brains aren't ready for the sheer amount of overstimulation that comes from modern communication technologies. That, in essence, we're amusing ourselves to death. One bad takeaway I got from Skagugly was that I have a tendency to pull all-nighters. I think there's something intrinsically thrilling about staying up all night to work on a project. An innate desperation is fostered that pushes me to produce work I otherwise wouldn't be capable of, or willing to accept, perhaps. It's a reckless and debilitating strategy, a bad habit that I need to be more vigilant about dealing with on account of I'm dealing with it right now. Two positives, though. Skagugly, the character itself, is a boon. I was not kidding with that Marge Simpson impression at the start of this. I just think he's neat. The second positive was that Skagugly was the first game I managed to include a properly branching pathway. The alternative path involving a subtle jumping puzzle and more improvisational narrative, while the traditional path provides a pre-written poem delivered by the titular character. Improv in general, I feel, has been going through a sort of renaissance the last few years. It's fun to incorporate into an otherwise overwrought script about a dying kingdom and its undying king. The Backrooms roll the dice. The all-nighter I pulled to finish Skagugly and some of the follow-up videos left me in a daze for a while, so I was glad to take a break and slot the next game I wanted to make into a 2-day game jam. With my sleep schedule thoroughly shot and a trip planned for the other half of the weekend, I basically blitzed through the development of this game from start to finish in one sitting. There were breaks for lunch and such, but it was one clean bullet point from gameless to game. I like how it turned out. One big takeaway, criticism-wise, provided by the game jam, albeit unspoken, is that a lot of people are tired of either Backrooms games or people aren't too fond of walking simulators. I can understand both perspectives well, though personally I disagree with both of them, more so with the latter than the former. One of the big positives for the Backrooms Roll the Dice was the critical praise the game received for the GMTK 2022 Game Jam. It was an assurance that what I was doing had a chance to make an impact. Another net game from this one was I figured out how to string multiple scenes along to bisect dialogue sequences in a somewhat hacky way. Can't hear the octopus talking if he doesn't exist on your plane of existence, after all. Space without adventure. Now we get to the final game of my first year of development. The 5th game in 5 weeks, if you count the unpublished Crab Island Ingress as the starting point. Perhaps the less said about Space Without Adventure, the better. I left a lot of baggage buried in the narrative of this one, and honestly I'm too tired of writing this script to pick at that scab right now. Suffice to say, the big negative I picked up from this game's development was that sometimes things end a bit earlier than you intend for them to. As I get into more detail on my video about developing the game, the original plan was to make 5 whole new games off of the Crab Island formula, but I only ended up making 4, with the 5th one being pushed back to sometime hopefully in early 2023. But Space Without Adventure, like any game, offered positives, chief among them being the ability to destroy. This was the first game I made where you can actively harm anything narratively, and while perhaps the 2 ending cards are overwrought, contrived, and borderline needlessly meta, there is, if nothing else, a choice to be made. I think there's something to that, like I unlocked a meaningful choices on the tech tree of game development deal. Not bad at all when you consider most games nowadays are lucky to offer you a single meaningful choice to begin with. What's more, I figure, I can make my voice sound really old-fashioned with a couple computer poking strategies. It made voicing the evil Ozymandias rather enjoyable. Yeah, so there you have it. All my first year's games. I went to
Meme school.
not no regular kind of school, but the school of online. If you think any of my games seem interesting, then give them a try in the link below. Most of them are free besides Avoid. Subscribe so you can find out about the Horror Santa game I should be releasing in time for Christmas, and maybe consider giving some of the other videos a watch if you aren't in a playing games sort of mood. And of course, if you're feeling extra giving this precious holiday season, you can help me survive the winter, get your own ideas for Easter eggs incorporated into my games, or even have whole games made for you monthly by hitting up my Patreon. Anyway, thank you for taking this sort of journey with me. It's fun to reflect on these games that I've spent the last year working on. I've already made a couple more in advance of this year because this video is coming out a few months into year number 2, but we'll save the retroactive video for those till next December, I think. Anyway, thanks for watching my video. Malik out.
And so the human remains.